FlutterFlow recently released a little known but a very powerful feature called custom authentication. And this allows you to connect your FlutterFlow app to pretty much any backend out there natively. And so in today's video, I'm going to be explaining it to you how it works. And a little bit later in the video, I'm going to be showing you a fully functioning proof of concept app that authenticates against a very cool backend, something that you couldn't have done before. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I share with you guys on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone from my Patreon page. And you can learn more about our amazing Patreon community via the link in the description below the video. Now, before we talk about this custom authentication, I think it's important to understand how standard authentication works. So with this FlutterFlow standard authentication, FlutterFlow supports Firebase or Supabase natively. And what this means is that once you enable authentication in Firebase or you configure authentication in Supabase, you can simply point your app to the appropriate backend. So if you're authenticating against Supabase, you can simply configure your FlutterFlow app to authenticate against Supabase. And FlutterFlow is going to take care of everything under the hood, right? So as the user is entering email and password and the user presses submit, FlutterFlow is going to send that information to Supabase, get back a response, and all the heavy lifting is going to be done for you automatically. And so once the user is logged in, they can access all of these other resources. And another thing that's important to understand is when the user is logged in, we have access to this authenticated user record. So what this means is that as the user is using the app, we can use this logged in information to make various decisions, right? We can display the username, user email, and that's available throughout the app. And this is important to understand because it's going to come into play once we talk about custom authentication. And the user can also log out, right? So when they click on log out, they are automatically logged out of the app and they're not going to get access to all of these resources. Okay, so this was the standard authentication flow. Now, with this new custom authentication, things work a little bit differently. The first thing that you need to do is you need to create an API call that's going to connect to your backend of choice and authenticate the user. And so as an example, let's say we're using Pocketbase, which is an amazing, light, but a very fast and powerful backend that you can use with your apps, and it's also free. The problem with Pocketbase is that you cannot use it with FlutterFlow natively, but you can use it using this custom authentication. And so you're going to create your API call. Your API is going to connect to Pocketbase and it's going to authenticate. If everything is okay, so you've provided the right credentials, you're gonna get back something called an Auth token, which stands for an authentication token. After you have this authentication token, you can log in. So this is going to be an action in your app that tells FlutterFlow that this user is good to go, log this person in. And so at this point, the user has successfully logged in and they can access all of these resources, just like with the standard authentication flow. And of course, the user can log out as well. So they can click on a button, they can log out. And once they log out, they're going to be presented with a login page. And so this flow is fairly similar to the standard flow, except we have a couple of extra steps, namely this part right here, where we need to actually manually authenticate against some third-party backend. Now, some important points when it comes to this custom authentication flow. When you have successfully authenticated the user via your custom API call, and you have logged in the user, at this point, FlutterFlow knows the user that's logged in, right? So you can get a ton of information about the user, and you can store it on this specific authenticated user record that I'm going to show you a little bit later when we have the demo. And so FlutterFlow stores user info such as Auth token, user email, etc., etc. You can store pretty much any kind of detail associated with the authenticated user that you want. If you want to do something with that information, such as display it on the profile page or have some kind of conditions, etc., etc. And so once you've taken care of these two steps, it works just like standard authentication, because at this point, FlutterFlow has all of that information having to do with the user that you can leverage as the user is using the app. All right, so now that you have a general idea how this authentication flow works, let me show you a fully working proof of concept app that uses Pocketbase as our backend of choice. Now, if you're not familiar with Pocketbase, you can simply head over to pocketbase.io and learn more about this amazing open source and free backend. I also have a video that I'm going to link right there that talks about Pocketbase in greater detail. All right, so here I have my Pocketbase instance, and we also have two collections. So we have the users collection where I'm storing 2 user records, and these are going to be the users that we're going to be logging in into our FlutterFlow app. And I also have articles where, I just have some basic information. We have the article ID, we have the article title, the article content, and I also have each article linked to a specific user. So these 2 articles are linked to James No Code, and this last article is linked to Michael Jackson, which are our 2 users here. And so the idea here is very simple. We're going to create rules that are going to dictate what kind of articles will the authenticated user have access to. So if I'm logged in as this user, we're only going to be seeing these 2 articles. On the other hand, if I'm logged in as this user, we're only going to be seeing this article right here. And in order to create our rules, you can simply click here, edit collection, and click on API rules. And here I have 2 rules. And so for list and search, as well as for view, we are checking if the logged in user ID is equal to the author ID, meaning that the user that's logged in, is that user the owner of the article that they're trying to view. And because I have it set on this list view, that means that when the user logs in, they're only going to be able to list the articles where they are the author, okay? And the same thing for the view as well. If they want to view this article, they will only be able to do it if they are the author of that specific article. All right, so now that we have the users collection, we have the articles collection, and we have these 2 rules here, we are done on our backend. So our backend is fully configured to display the right articles for the right users that are logged in. And so now let me show you a fully functioning FlutterFlow app that does exactly what I described. And so this is the app right here. And before I show you how I build this app, let's go ahead and run this app so that you can see exactly what's happening. All right, so here's the app. And the first thing that we are seeing is a login screen. And that is because we haven't logged into our FlutterFlow app just yet. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And I'm logging in as James, which is one of the 2 users that I've set up in Pocketbase. So let's go ahead and enter the password here. And once I click login, we are redirected to our homepage here. And on this homepage, we are listing the articles. So as you can see, I'm seeing these 2 articles where I am the author, right? So this is The Secret to Success, my favorite travel destination. And if you go back to Pocketbase, you can see these are the 2 articles, right? The Secret to Success, my favorite travel destination. And here I can do all kinds of things, maybe edit an article, delete an article, create a new article, what have you. And if you go to our profile page, you will see that we are also displaying some extra information having to do with the logged in user, right? So we have access to their name, email, UID, etc., etc. It's all there. Now here I can also log out, which is going to log me out of the FlutterFlow app. So once I click here, I am now logged out and I have to log in back again. So now let's go ahead and log in as the other user. Let's go ahead and log in as Michael Jackson here. So I'm going to do michael@michael.com, password, and I'm going to log in. Okay, we've successfully logged in, and we are seeing that one article, right? Michael Jackson, The Truth About Life. If I go back here, this is this article right here, The Truth About Life, Michael Jackson. And here I can also go to the profile page, and I'm seeing some information having to do with the currently authenticated user, and I can click on log out and I can log out. Now let's say I try to log in but I do not have the correct credentials. So let's say I enter some random information here, a random password, and this user obviously does not exist, so it should not let me in. So I'm going to click on sign in, and here I get an error, failed to authenticate. And so I think you would agree that this is a very, very simple but a very useful proof of concept in order to build all kinds of apps with custom authentication backends. Okay, so now that you've seen how this app works, let's go ahead and let me show you how I actually build this app. Okay, So here we are back in FlutterFlow UI Builder, and the first thing that I want to show you is we have 3 pages. Okay, so we have the profile page, we have the login page, and we have the home page. The next thing I want to show you are the API calls, right? So if I click here, I have 2 API calls. I have the login API, and I have this get articles API that I can execute after I have logged in. Now for this login API, we're using a Pocketbase provided API URL. And so if you go back to Pocketbase, select users, click on API preview, then you can click on auth with password, and you're going to be given an API endpoint that you can execute providing identity and password, and that's going to authenticate you against Pocketbase Auth. And so if you go back here, this is exactly what we're using, and in the body, we are sending a JSON object with identity and password, and these two things are our variables. So if we click on variables, these are going to be the variables that are going to be automatically filled in after the user submits the form. And that's about it. So if I go to response and test, and I provide this email and the password, and I do a test API call, I'm going to get a 200 success, and this is what I get back. So I get back this user record that I can capture some of this information on the user authentication record in FlutterFlow, as I'm going to show you in a second. But most importantly, I get this token that I will need to send in subsequent requests. So anytime I'm making another request to get some resource, right, I need to send this token, because this is the token that identifies who is the user that's logged in. Okay, and another thing that I'm doing here is I'm saving a bunch of fields and giving them a custom JSON path, right? So I'm saving this auth token because we need it for a subsequent request. I'm saving the name, username, email, and user ID because I want to save this information on the user record in case I need to display it somewhere or do something with it while the user is navigating the app. And this next API call, this is a simple call to get the articles. And so if you go back to Pocketbase, select articles, click on API preview, you have various endpoints here, right? You can do list, view, create, etc., right? So in this case, I am doing list. And if you scroll down, we have this API endpoint here, right? This is where you get the records from that article collection that we are querying, okay? And so if I go back here, this is what I'm doing here. And as you can see, for the headers, I'm setting this content type application JSON. And this is a header that you should always send, right? Because 99% of the time, you're going to be dealing with JSON data. And for the second header, and this is where we are sending our authentication token, right? So we're doing authorization, bearer, and then we have this API token variable that we're going to fill in once we get it back from the API, okay? And if we go back to variables, this is the API token right here. And so if we go into response and test, and I provide an API token, I can do test API call, and I get a 200 success, okay? And these are the articles that I'm getting back. And as you can see, I'm getting back 2 items, right? And these are the 2 pieces of content, the 2 pieces of data that I have access to in my account as James no code, right? So I'm getting these 2 pieces of content. And of course, I'm also configuring custom JSON paths. More specifically, I want to know who the author name is, right? This is the author name. I want to know who the content is, and I want to know who the title is. And that way I can display this information on the home page. Okay, so now that we've covered these 2 API calls, let's talk about how they work. And so if we go to our login view here, and this is where it all begins, if you click on the button here, what we have here is 3 actions here. So the first thing that we're doing is we're doing this login API call, okay? We're doing this login API call, we're passing email and password, and we're checking if it has succeeded or not. And if it has succeeded, and this is very, very important, we are executing this custom authentication login method. This is not a regular login, right? So if you come over here and you type custom, you're going to see custom authentication. And this is the login here that we are using, right? This is this custom authentication login. And for this login action here, we're not only logging in the user, but we are also setting various parameters on the auth properties. Okay, so we're setting things like auth token. We're also setting a user ID. And most importantly, we are setting some more information on this custom data type that we created, right? So if we come over here, we have a custom data type called user, and here you can set all kind of information that you deem important in your FlutterFlow app. So for instance, I'm setting in the user ID, I'm setting in the display name, I'm setting in the email, I'm setting in the username. And remember, we are getting all this detail when we execute that first API login call to Pocketbase, right? It gives us all of this information. And in fact, we are not saving all of the information that it's giving us. We're only saving a subset of the information. And obviously you can save more, you can save less, but we are saving it in a custom data type called user that I have defined previously, right? So if you come over here to this custom data types, we have this custom data type user that I have defined here manually. And these are the fields that I deem important for my specific use case: UID, display name, create time, email, and username. You may also be configuring the same fields. Maybe you're configuring more fields or less fields. It depends on your specific use case. And so after we execute this custom login action here, the user has successfully logged in. So in terms of FlutterFlow, it's the same as if you were to log in using Firebase or Supabase. It's the exact same thing, except we are using our custom API call here. Next, we have this homepage where the user is redirected after logging in. And here I'm simply displaying the information from that articles collection, right? So in this case, I'm displaying an author and I'm displaying a title, right? And the way I'm doing it is I'm executing an API called get articles, and I'm passing in this API token, right? Remember, we saved it on user, right? So we have this authenticated user right here, and we have their authentication token that we saved in the previous login action. Okay, so once we have that, we execute this second API call, and here I'm generating dynamic children from items, which essentially lists the list of records. And after we have a list of items that we got back, essentially a list of articles, I'm giving them a variable called items. And here I'm pulling out the author, right? So this is the JSON path for the author here, and this is the JSON path for the title here. And as a result, because we have these specific API rules for listing records, we are only seeing the records that we are the author on, basically the records that we own, because of this rule right here. And it's also going to be the same situation if we were to view a specific record. You wouldn't be able to view a record that you do not own, but you will be able to view a record that you do own. And last but not least, we have here the profile page, and here we are displaying display name and email, right? So if I select display name, click here, you can see that we have this user data fields, right, that we are saving from that first API call. And so this is where I'm picking up display name, and this is where I'm picking up the email as well. So if I click here, you will see that we have email here as well. And for the logout, if the user clicks on logout, we are executing that custom logout, right? So we have this custom authentication logout. This is exactly what I'm executing. And so if the user clicks on logout, FlutterFlow will log out that user. And so as far as FlutterFlow is concerned, that user has successfully logged out, and they will need to log back in. And so that was a very simple proof of concept app using Pocketbase as our authentication, as well as a database backend. And we have not only implemented authentication, but we have also implemented authorization using specific rules for various operations on our data. And so before this functionality, you couldn't really been able to connect to Pocketbase as easily as you can do right now. And of course, this awesome functionality allows you to connect to just about any other backend out there. So things like Xano and many other custom backends are now very, very easy to integrate with. Now, if you're watching this video and you're thinking to yourself, this is awesome, I definitely want to build apps and I want them to connect to third-party backends. I want them to connect to some interesting backends that I couldn't have connected to before. If that's you, then you definitely need to join our amazing Patreon community. And when you join our amazing Patreon community, not only will you get access to all the resources that I talked about in this video, which means that you will be able to easily view and or clone this app that I talked about here today. And that's going to give you an edge when it comes to building apps that use custom backends. So if you've ever wanted to use a backend such as Xano or Pocketbase or perhaps something else, you will be able to do it very, very quickly and easily. But that's not all. You're also going to get access to all the apps that I covered on this channel. There are over 150 apps or so, and they're all on my Patreon page. And that means you can view and or clone them very, very easily. And that's going to give you an edge when it comes to your no-code development. Plus, you're going to get access to some extra content, such as Q&As, live streams, behind-the-scenes content. Plus, you're going to get access to our Patreon-supported masterclass, where I do a deep dive on topics that the community votes on. And of course, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated. And so if you feel that anything that I've just talked about is going to provide you with some level of value, then I definitely urge you to check out our amazing, rapidly growing Patreon community and consider becoming a member. You can learn more about it via the link in the description below the video. Additionally, if you guys want to learn about the backend that I talked about in this video, Pocketbase, I'm going to have a video linked in the description below as well.